Alrighty, so this is going to be my first deck guide for the Legends of the Force cycle, and not one that I think most people would have expected, but I'm going with Darth Maul, and we're going to build around Vergence Temple, the new rare blue base that gives you the Force if you play high health units. So, I'll be doing a pretty deep dive into this. Breaking down the deck list and all that. For any of you who've seen my deck guides, you should already kind of know what to expect. But before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. And if you're interested in some more content from me, including live deck updates, which this deck will be a part of, then do check out my Patreon as well. All right, table of content. So we're going to break down why I'm building around Darth Maul, why I'm using Vergence Temple, and talk a little bit about the flaws of Villain Force as a whole, and like that kind of ties into the Vergence Temple choice. Then break down the deck list card by card, and then a few deck specific things that I want to talk about, like how to manage the Force, the cleanup crew, and a review of the interaction. And finally, it'll be a big list of cards that I am kind of considering as other options. There's not going to be a strict sideboard for this build. You'll see a bunch of cards in the sideboard and in the deck that's posted, but it's not a 10-card sideboard right now. It's very early in the season. I don't typically do 10-card sideboards this early because sideboards are built when there is a meta. So you'll see a maybe board. Think about it that way. All right, so why Darth Maul? When this leader was first revealed, and then when I even did my leader review video, I rated this guy pretty poorly. And while I still don't think he's like the best leader in the game, I think I disrespected the leader a little bit. And let's say cons are still here. A 6 health, 6 deploy leader is a problem in a lot of situations. I don't love that. In the future, I keep hoping these kinds of leaders will just have that 7th or 8th point of health. It would make a world of difference for their viability. But what Darth Maul does have is actually a very powerful action effect. Deal 1 damage to 2 different units. A little annoying sometimes that you have to hit your own units if your opponent doesn't have 2 in play, but we can turn that into some upside as well, which we will be doing in this build. He has that same ability on his attack. He does swing for 5. 5 is more than most leaders swing for on 6 resources, unless they're like Anakin, there's probably some more. But for the most part, he hits pretty hard, and we're going to try to maximize his leader ability. Like, that's actually the main thing I'm doing here. You'll see blue-red Villain Force much more commonly as a Mother Talzin build. And while Mother Talzin is a fantastic leader, like the leader itself is crazy good, very good stats, a very powerful ability. There's one small issue with the builds that I've been running with her. And I do like the leader, but I don't love using the Force base because it forces you into playing a mono Force unit curve. And that's something we're avoiding with Darth Maul by playing Vergence Temple. So let's get into that a little bit. Why am I playing this base? 25 health is not a lot. That is true. But this fixes my main issue with the Villain Force archetype, and that is you have to play a bunch of bad cards in your Force deck if you are using the Force base, the common Force base. So think about those Mother Talzin decks you've seen. You get Secretive Sage and you get Karis. Fantastic turn 1 plays, but then all the other ones are bad. Like, they just are. Like the 2/2 that draws a card, Kylo, the Acolyte of Beyond, whatever it may be, they aren't particularly good cards, but you kind of have to run them. Then you go into the 3-drop curve slot. You got Grand Inquisitor, fantastic. But then what do you got? You got Marin, you've got Jedi in Hiding, whatever it may be. They're subpar units, simply are less rate than like the hero counterparts. Now, the deck is still powerful. Talzin does a lot of very good things here, but I have been looking for a way to play what I consider the best payoffs, which are the Dooku unit, the Darth Tyrannus, the 4-drop, and the Talzin's Assassin, and maximize a leader ability, such as Darth Maul's, without needing to spend so much deck space on cards that I simply do not want to play with. And that is where Vergence Temple comes in. We will be building with real units in this deck, and they will incidentally be turning on the Force, and we won't need to play all these weird low rate Force units to maximize this. We will not have a lot of things that use the Force in this deck, simply because you can't get the Force more than once per turn with a Vergence Temple build. So our leader already uses it, right? So we don't need to double dip too much. We will, of course, play Talzin's Assassin, which is a fantastic unit. But past that, we have Darth Maul's ability, and we have the Dooku. We don't need to over-invest in Force payoffs with this build. So Vergence Temple is a way to kind of get around the flaws of the Villain Force package while still getting to use the payoffs. And, you know, if there was a different leader to use than Maul, I'd look at it. I thought about making a build like this with Snoke. I think you can do this with Green Blue as well. Some interesting stuff there. And Vergence Temple is certainly something I think you should explore in general. Another cool build that you can do with this would be with Obi-Wan. And then instead of playing like the Force package, you can play just all those high health units, droids, and things like that. So Vergence Temple, I think, is certainly the most interesting base to build around from the new rare cycle. I don't love the rest of them, and that's what we're going to see here. So let's take a look on the deck list. You'll see at the top there, Force Throw. All right, Force Throw is the best card in the game. It's going to get suspended eventually, is my guess, but it's not yet, so we're going to run it. It's broken. Just put it in your deck. When you draw more of these than your opponent, you win a lot of games. All right, but let's take a look at our turn 1 plays. We just have 4 health or more units, right? Dr. Pershing turns on the Force for us. Fantastic. HK-47, a solid unit, just like Karis. They are 2/4s that turn on the Force. And, you know, there isn't another particularly aggressive one. There's a few others, like the Scout Bike Pursuer, who's the 1/4 with Grit. But I opted with Regional Governor as the last slot here, which I think can definitely be kind of annoying for your opponent sometimes. While the Regional Governor will be turning on the Force for us, which means that she'll be enabling our Darth Maul ability, so she's not a complete dud when it turns into like combat. Now, we hope to usually not start with Regional Governor on turn 1, but it's not the most embarrassing thing. I've put a couple Force chokes in this deck. Think just being able to like keep your opponent off of accelerating early is really important, especially in a deck that's trying to curve into the powerhouses of Dooku and Talzin's Assassin, or Darth Tyrannus and Talzin's Assassin. I'll stop saying Dooku because there's an actual Dooku in this deck. So you get to remove more units right early, which is really important because if you stay ahead on board, you're going to be really happy. And that's like the biggest thing about the red-blue Villain Force package, is that it tries to stay ahead and get and like just get there and stay like always ahead of your opponent. But now the really exciting stuff. Look at the 3 drops. They're fantastic. Grand Inquisitor, you know, he's in both versions, like the non-Vergence Temple. We got General Grievous here. He's just a 4/4. 4/4 is actually pretty good in the meta right now when there's a bunch of 2/4s floating around. He turns on the Force for us. And Ogdo Bogdo. This is unironically probably the best I've ever seen Ogdo Bogdo perform. I think it's better in this deck than it's been in Han for me. You can turn him on with your own Darth Maul's ability here, and he doesn't take 2 damage. He only takes 1, right? So he's a 5/4, which is much sturdier. He really does a lot of work in this deck. It's really cool to see him perform here. All right. We got 3 Power of the Dark Side. I don't think I need to explain this card too much. It's very good removal. I've put 2 copies of Darth Maul's Lightsaber. You know, it works pretty well on the flip turn, to be honest. You push a bunch of damage and you can kill basically anything. Remember, you don't even have to attack with it, so it does provide a lot of reach. There's not a lot of upgrades that give you 4 power for 3 cost. I've won games by sticking this on an Ogdo Bogdo, right? Like, it's solid. I don't think it's necessarily core. You could look at like Fallen Lightsaber too, but I like the action cheat that it enables with the Darth Maul leader. The 4 drops, I've mentioned Tyrannus and Talzin's Assassin. They are your biggest payoffs. Tyrannus, of course, the best, and especially here where he doesn't even use the Force, so you can use him and then also use Darth Maul's ability, something that you can't do with Talzin's Assassin. And you'll notice that outside of Talzin's Assassin, the only other card here that uses the Force besides Darth Maul is Karis. And we very rarely actually activate Karis. It happens sometimes where, you know, her -2/-2 is better than Darth Maul dealing 1 to 2 units, but she is, a lot of it is just she's good stats. She has the Force trait, so she can enable like a turn 2 Force throw. You can win games straight off of that, right? Karis, turn 1, next turn you like Force throw plus HK47 or something, and you just like kind of roll from there. You see a couple copies of IG-2000, more on this later, but you know, we have a lot of incidental damage in this deck, especially because our leader is doing it a lot of the time. So he comes in, can help clean up. 2 Fell the Dragons. I think it's just important right now to have this card. I think it's better than Shatterpoint for the most part because it's not going to use the Force. It's certainly in a deck that is not going to be able to generate the Force more than once per turn. Devastating Gunship. Other than Kira, another place that I think like this card shines, right? I don't love this card outside of Kira most of the time. I think even if you like get a kill with it, it's kind of anemic in space. But once again, Darth Maul can turn this into a real unit with his pings, and of course Darth Maul, IG-2000, like all this incidental damage we deal will really help Devastating Gunship come down and maybe actually remove real units. And then all the way at the top, we've got a couple Ruthless Raiders for extra reach and also extra cleanup. 2 Dooku's, same thing, right? I think his ability is going to work a little better in this deck than often because we do have all this incidental damage. And then 2 Devastators to wrap it all up. Give us like that final push. Yeah, I like Devastator in general. I've been playing it in Talzin as well. I think the card is solid. All right, so talked a lot about the Force, so how are we managing this? The first and the key part here, which I've mentioned, is we don't have a lot of ways to use it because our leader just uses it, and our leader has a very good ability, so we don't need to dip so much. It's really core, though, that you have it on for your 4R plays like Tyrannus and Talzin's Assassin. You need to manage Darth Maul's pings, especially because sometimes you do have to hurt your own units, so you need to watch out for situations where you put any of them below 4 health, because in that case, if you don't have something else in play, you won't regain the Force, and you can get kind of trapped sometimes when you do that. You have to really think about your sequencing here. If you're going to do Talzin's Assassin, right, you can't use Darth Maul's ability that turn, and if you needed him to like pump a grit unit like Devastating Gunship or turn on your Ogdo Bogdo, you can't do both, right? There is a limitation to this Vergence Temple. You get one shot at this. Karis, I mentioned, you're not going to use her ability very often. You really need to think about how you're managing this. You're okay throwing initiative a decent amount of the time with Darth Maul's ability because when you need to use the Force to get it back, right? So at the end of the turn, you're just going to get that Force back. If it means getting to do a double ping and then they get initiative, but you get that Force back to do it again, that can be certainly worth it, especially if it sets up like a kill with IG-2000 or with Talzin's Assassin, or maybe sets up your 7-cost Dooku, whatever it may be. So it's a little like you're going to probably mess up a little bit when you play with the Vergence Temple, especially if you're coming from a deck like Talzin Red that gets it on attack. You kind of forget sometimes that you can't regain the Force. You forget sometimes that like after you attack with a unit, it's going to lose health, and then all of a sudden you won't gain it back at the end of the turn. Also remember, Tyrannus does not have 4 health, so he won't turn it on for you. So you do have to play around with it and kind of get used to how it works. And here's our cleanup crew, and you know, a lot of these cards just kind of build on each other, especially with Maul's ability, right? IG-2000, that's an extra 1 to multiple units. It can also hurt your own units, so if you need to turn on that Ogdo Bogdo and you don't have the Force with Maul or something, or you used it already to hit 2 units, works there. And you know, you all this little damage, it adds up a lot, especially in the early game, and that those are like those pivotal turns, turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, where you're really fighting for board control and trying to just get value trades and stay ahead of your opponent. This deck is not going to be very good at catching up. You notice that the rate on a lot of the units in the top end is not going to really match a Han 2 Force deck, for instance, or a Kira deck. It needs to get ahead in these mid-game turns with really valuable plays, like IG killing a unit, and then like your Maul ping killing a unit, or setting up a powerful devastating gunship where you kill a value target there, and then you keep something else alive in play, and you have like all of a sudden 2 units to your opponent's 0, right? Ruthless Raider can come in and kill something a lot more often in this deck. Dooku as well. So it's all about managing your pings and managing all these like little incidental damage that you can do. Pair it up with like Talzin's Assassin, and don't forget that Maul pings on his attack as well. So that's a really big turn where you can often use his ability, hit 2 things, he flips, hits another 2 things. That's already him dealing 4 damage spread out. Maybe the IG can do another 2 or 3, right? You can get a lot of like ground coverage. It's just going to be more difficult sometimes to finish larger units, which is why we pack things like Force Choke and Fell the Dragon and Power the Dark Side. All our incidental damage takes care of the small things. When we need a big removal, we have it, and we just continue to stay ahead. And a little bit on the interaction, which, you know, I've talked about, but Force Throw, I'll do the quick spiel here. The card is too good, honestly. It's very difficult to actually play around it anymore because of how early it gets turned on and how difficult it is to actually keep your opponent off the Force, because all the units they play have the Force, and all the way to the fact that your opponent draws usually infinite cards when they're playing this because they pair it with Ki-Adi-Mundi. Now, we don't have Ki-Adi, but it's still kind of a busted card in our deck, especially because we're doing so much incidental damage that even when our opponent is somehow holding back really cheap cards, that's often enough to still kill anything. Don't be scared of firing this thing off early, especially if you start with like a Karis and you have another 2-drop. You can create really huge blowout scenarios on like turn 2 with this, or turn 3. It's just really difficult to play around it early because your hand's really pinched. You just haven't drawn enough cards to like really just hold a bunch of things. And think about it this way: when you play Force Throw and your opponent, like let's say they discard a 2-drop, and you do 2 damage with it, just 2. That's Daring Raid plus your opponent discarded a card. That's how good Force Throw is. When your opponent plays around it, it's still like Daring Raid on steroids, right? Deal 2, your opponent discards a card. That's like the floor of this card. It's kind of crazy, the ceiling that it can get to. It's also a problem for our deck too, because Darth Maul really gets a lot of his value from attacking. And, you know, we can get kind of pinned on our leader sometimes, where our opponent is able to get a Force unit into play and we can't kill it. And they can just sit there with 1 resource and like, oh, do we flip our Maul and just get something chucked at it, right? The self-discard mode on this is also incredibly, incredibly powerful. The whole package is there. We're going to run 3 of this. We would run 10 of this if we could. Everyone is going to be running this card in kind of everything right now. And you can't, it's very difficult to play around it. For you and for your opponent. So draw more than your opponent and you'll be happy. Force Choke, on the other hand, it's in and out of lists a lot of the time. Do think we're going to struggle a little bit sometimes into like a ground-based aggro deck, and it's going to help you there, and it is going to help remove these chunkier units that are incidental damage sometimes can't. And, you know, it's very cheap, and the whole motto of this deck is stay ahead, right? And 1 cost removal helps you stay ahead, even if it gives your opponent cards. We are not going for that much of an attrition battle in this deck unless we like draw multiple Force Throws. That's not really the game plan, especially main deck. It might be a game plan post board, but it's really, we are not like angling that way. And Power of the Dark Side and Fell, they're both fantastic, especially because we can clear a lot of smaller units through our Dooku's or our Talzin's Assassin, our leader ability, and IG, whatever it may be. So power really helps deal with threats that we otherwise can't, like leaders or high health units. And Fell is sort of the same idea here. Reach for units that we normally can't interact with our like main game plan. All right, and to wrap this up, more options, right? These are some more cards I'm considering. There's probably some others that I haven't even thought of yet because still kind of brewing this deck. Force Lightning, it's interesting. We don't have that many Force units actually in this deck, so it's not as like clean to turn on. We don't flip early, so like Talzin does. I really like this card in Talzin. I'm not sure it fits here, but it might. Kylo's Tie, for a while I was playing this instead of Regional Governor. Now I did just not like ever starting with Kylo's Tie because you don't get the Force, but it is a pretty good card. And, you know, it actually is a little bit of a counterplay to Force Throw. Not really, because like you often don't even want to play it when you discard it. But it is a solid card, and we do have a decent space presence in this deck. So being able to pivot to space certainly adds some power. I mentioned Scout Bike Pursuer earlier. It's another 4 health unit. He's not great. The Grit, though, does add a little bit of upside because we can self-ping him, turn him into a 2/3, and he can start actually attacking for some damage. Open Fire, I think it's not quite as good right now as most of the other removal I'm playing, but the fact that it can hit space is important. So, you know, it might be a little more worth consideration, especially if you expect space decks around. Chirrut, I put it here mostly to explain why I'm not running it, and the issue here is that because we can't regain the Force, he really taxes it. His best trait is actually the fact that, right, they try to attack it, you use the Force, and then you can attack with another unit. It makes it a nightmare to remove him, but because we can't do that, at best case, you only activate him once, and then he's using up our leader abilities activation, or, you know, turns off our Dooku, or whatever it may be. So, Tyrannus. I keep saying Dooku. Tyrannus. Anyway, Chirrut, MIA because of that, but he might be a sideboard option for Sabine. Lone Pike, you know, Smuggle is pretty good right now when everyone's chucking cards out of your hand, so I think it's at least worth considering sticking a couple of these in the deck, not because there's any particular synergy here, just because it's nice to have Smuggle. Scimitar, pretty solid if you want to be much more aggressive, like instead of the IG slot, because of course you can self-ping this and it can start hitting for 6 damage. Darth Maul, the legendary from Twilight, only mentioning this here because of how good he is with Darth Maul's lightsaber. If you can stick him and then you use that lightsaber, you turn him into a 9/8 that attacks 2 units, and he overwhelms over both of them. So, like, let's say they have like a 3/4 and a 3/5. He overwhelms 9 over both of those units, right? That does 9 to your opponent's base. He will kill both of them. That's really powerful. Now, he's still kind of anemic, right? He does nothing when you play him, so it's a little difficult to set it up, but the blowout potentials are there. Bombing Run, that's mostly just to counter something like a Vader deck. We do have a lot of like additional incidental damage, which is nice. We have ways to interact with like Lurking TIE Phantom, with Talzin's Assassin, and Karis, so if we can self-kill our Karis. So it's nice to just be able to wipe all their stuff. No Glory if we want even more targeted removal. And then a bunch of like bombs here. Anakin, now we don't double trigger him, but it's the same way a lot of these cards like Ruthless Raider and IG like help clean up. Anakin can do that as well. The Sun here, this card's actually pretty impressive. I played with it a bit instead of the Count Dooku. For this video, I decided to go with Dooku, but I think Sun, he offers a lot of power there. Like, we do sometimes get ahead decently well in like that 6/7 R turn, and he's a way to kind of close out. Remember, he comes down, if you have the Force, he's actually an 8/8, and then all your units get buffed. So he doesn't require you to use the Force, and we have the Force most of the time, so he's pretty cool. Dooku's a little more it's going to be a little more well-rounded, I think, overall. And then look at all these guys, right? Palpatine, Supreme Leader Snoke, Avenger, Krayt Dragon. If you're looking for more finishers, I think in some matchups, some of this will be quite good. And maybe some of this is sideboard stuff, especially like the Krayt Dragon into like control decks. Maybe Snoke into like Vader. Palpatine into decks that play Snoke or something. Avenger. These are all really powerful cards. We're not really a high curve deck. We're trying to usually close out games before this stuff will take over, but that's not always possible, and it's certainly nice to have more options. All right, so that's going to be the end for this one. Not too long of a deck guide this time, but this deck is performing better for me than I thought it would, honestly, because I didn't think Darth Maul was particularly good when I first looked at him, but I think the Villain Force package, especially the 4 drops, is powerful. when I don't have to waste so much deck space enabling it with bad units. Now, is this better than Talzin Red? I can't tell you it is, but I also can't tell you it isn't, which I think says a lot because that deck is getting much more like noise around it, so to speak. And this, I don't think is getting any because Darth Maul is kind of regulated to the bargain bin of leaders. But Vergence Temple is quite a nice base, and it works really well with this build. So check it out. Let me know what you think. And until next time, take care.